Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishna Megillah, Parak Aleph, Chapter 1, Mishnah Gimel, Mishnah 3. So the previous Mishnah distinguished between a Kfarim, and Ir Gedola, what we loosely translate as a village and a large city. If you're a villager, then it's possible that you would be able to read the Megillah earlier than the 14th. So now the Mishnah says, Ezihir Gedola, what qualifies as a big city? The answer is Kol Sheyesh Ba Asara Batlanim, a city that has 10 people who are idle from work. Their job is to be in shul, to ready to have a minyan. That's what Asara Batlanim are. They hire 10 people to make sure that there should be a minyan in the shul when needed. That's their job. And if you have it, if your city if you have that in your city, you're a big city. If you don't have that, then you're not a big city. You could actually be very big, but if you don't have Asara Batlanim, you're not considered a large city. You're considered a kfar, considered a village, and you would qualify to be able to read the Megillah earlier than the 14th. Okay, Pachas Mikan, less than 10 Batlanim, less than 10 idle men, Harei a kfar, then they're considered a village. Okay, so that's those 10 men were always to be present in shul during the time of davening, so that could be a minyan, and therefore that makes you a big city. Otherwise, you're a kfar, a village. Now, next, regarding these, regarding reading the Megillah, is where the sages said you do it earlier and not later, right? Depending, we had cases before. You're not going to go ahead and read, and where the Megillah is always read earlier, not later, but read earlier. But now we're going to have exceptions to where we say that you don't go earlier, but you rather go later. Al zaman atse kayanim, by the time for bringing of the wood, the time of the bringing of the wood of the kayanim. We had this not long ago. You had your group of people who had their day where they were bringing wood for the Beis Hamikdash. That day they brought the wood for the Beis Hamikdash. They brought a carbon. Now, if that day, and it was a date, right? We had dates. The Mishnah had mentioned dates when they bring their wood. If that date falls out on Shabbos, so they're not going to be able to bring their carbon that day because it's a carbon yachid, it's individual carbon, it's an individual's carbon. Individual carbonis of individuals are not brought on Shabbos. Therefore, the question would be now, okay, so should we push it off for a day later or should we do it earlier? So when it comes to this, we don't do it earlier because the way this is explained by Tanura is that earlier would mean that they're doing it before their obligation has come yet. It's like the obligation to bring the wood has not yet arrived, and therefore to do it earlier isn't in place. I find it interesting we call it an obligation. I kind of thought that this was something that the families donated the first time, then the Chachamim gave them the rights to it from then on. But at the end of the day, it becomes an obligation. And with this obligation being the wood came the time for being the carbon. So looking at it all together as an obligation, if you did it earlier, that means you didn't reach the time of your obligation, and therefore there would not be the time for fulfilling it. And therefore, we push it to a day later. That's the first example of things that we push to later. The Tisha B'Av. If Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, there too we say that we don't push the fast back, we push the fast forward. If it comes that Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, then we don't have Tisha B'Av on Friday or Thursday. Rather, we have Tisha B'Av on Sunday. And that is because to go ahead and push it all the way back to Thursday would mean commemorating a tragic event earlier than we need to. It's always something, when it comes to commemorating something tragic, we push it off instead of bringing it on earlier. And therefore, if Shavasa B'Tammuz falls out on Shabbos, it's the same idea. It's on Sunday. The exception to the rule to this is Tainus Esther. If you come out, if the Purim is on Sunday, which means Tainus Esther is really on Shabbos, then when do we observe Tainus Esther? The Thursday before. So in that sense, we are pushing it back. Now, there's one obvious reason for pushing it back, because you push it forward, it's going to be Purim. right? If you can't do it on Shabbos, you're going to do it on Sunday. It's going to be Purim. That you're not going to do. That's number one. Number two, Tainus Esther is not about Churban Beis Hamikdash. Not about commemorating destruction of Beis Hamikdash. It's about remembering what happened when we went to war against our enemies and how we fasted and did tshuva before going to war against our enemies, and how Hashem saved us. So Tainus Esther is not about Churban Beis Hamikdash, and therefore commemorating it, doing it earlier, doesn't have the same issue as Tisha B'Av and Shavas B'Tammuz earlier. So that's the second thing. Chagiga. Chagiga means the Shalmei Chagiga. Every person who came for Shalosh Regalim, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot had to bring a carbon shlamim, a peace offering, a shlamim carbon. It's called Shalmei Chagiga. The shlamim that you bring for the festival. Now, that is a private carbon. That's a personal carbon. And although the time for bringing it is the first day of Sukkot and the first day of Pesach and Shavuos, but if you can't do it that day, the standard, it's very understandable you may be able to do it that day. There's a lot of people need to do it. You have the time to make up for it. On Sukkot, you have 7 more days because Shemini Atzeres you can also make up. Well, you have 7. You have 7 days to make it up. When it comes to Pesach, you have 6 days to make it up. And when it comes to Shavuos, you have 6 days later to make it up. And therefore, since it's possible to make up this carbon after Yontif, or after Shabbos rather, so therefore we say that you don't bring it on Shabbos, you delay it. Do it. You delay it. Do it till you wait till after that. Okay. And the last example is Hakel. That's an example where the Torah says that after the Sukkot, after the Shemitah year, all of Klal Yisrael have to be at the Beis Hamikdash. Shalosh Regalim is the men. Hakel, everybody has to be there. Men, women, children, babies. Everybody has to be there. Now, if it's Shabbos, you're going to have a problem. You can't get the babies there because you have to go through Rosh Hashanah to get there. You have to go through a public domain to get there. How are you going to bring the babies? And therefore, since it was not possible to Hakel on Shabbos, they would delay it. So in all these are the examples. By reading Megillah, we do it earlier. If it comes out on Shabbos, we push it back. When it comes to these things, we push it ahead. We delay it for after Shabbos. Now, back to Megillah. Even though my Megillah, they said, we read it earlier and not later. Again, for the people of the villages, we say that they can read it earlier than the time for even though it's before Purim. Okay. Mutarim behesped of those days, even though you're reading the Megillah those days, even though the villages are reading the Megillahs those days, they can still have a eulogy and a fast day. If there's a reason for a communal fast, they could do it, even though they read the Megillah that day. If there's somebody passed away and they need to make a eulogy, you could do it that way. Even though you're reading Megillah that day, nonetheless, it's not the actual holiday, and you can't go, and it's not, and therefore it's not a holiday to say that you can't have a fast day or have eulogies. Umatanas levyanim, and also the mitzvah of giving to the poor on Purim can be fulfilled on that day. Matanas levyanim, that mitzvah of giving to poor on the Purim day goes because they're reading the Megillah, because the Gemara says the poor are always expecting to get their money when the Megillah is read. That's how they connected it. That's how their expectations work that way. And therefore, the Chachamim said, well, if that's how they work, then whatever they read the Megillah, you can do Matanas Levyanim. However, when it comes to the Purim Suda and Mishalach Manis, that cannot be fulfilled on the earlier day. Right, on that day, whether it's the day before the 14th, you cannot do the Purim Suda nor do Mishlach Manas, giving the gifts of food. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Amosai, when do we say this? When do we say that the villages can read earlier than the 14th? If it's a place where they come into the big city on Monday and Thursday. But let's say you have a village, they don't come in. They don't come in for Monday and Thursday. They don't. Then it can only be read at its time, which means they're going to have to make the trip in to hear the Megillah reading. The assumption is that in the village they can't read the Megillah. They need to come into the big city. Well, if you anywhere coming to the big city, then we allow you to read earlier. But if you're on Monday and Thursday, but if you're not coming in Monday and Thursday anyway, this village just doesn't do that. They don't come in for Kriyas HaTorah. They don't come in to go to Bezdin. Then since they're not coming in that day anyway, we don't give them the heter. We don't give them permission then to read earlier on that day, but rather they'll have to make the trip on the day of the 14th in order to fill the mitzvah in its time. The only time we allow them to do it earlier is they're anyway coming in. Then we say, okay, to free you up on Purim Day, you can read on that day that you're coming in. If you're not coming in anyway, so then we don't allow you to go ahead and read earlier. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.